At 9 in the evening on the 14th of June, 1862, Miss Penelope Loxwood refused to wear the flowers that every fashionable woman in London wanted. Lady Deborah Loxwood stood behind her in the mirrored dressing room at Loxwood House, holding an emerald spray against the ivory silk of Penelope's gown, as though the matter had already been settled. The artificial leaves gleamed with a brilliance no living plant could sustain. "You'll wear them," Deborah said. "Malcolm has arranged tonight for months. The Eastborough ball will decide whether Winstead Green becomes the triumph of the season." Penelope looked at the spray rather than her aunt's reflection. 3 folded notes lay inside her reticule. Mrs. Bessett had sent them from Spitalfields over the previous fortnight. One described a girl who vomited after finishing green petals. Another spoke of headaches that lifted on Sundays and returned by Tuesday. The third mentioned a burning throat, trembling fingers, and green dust trapped inside cuffs. None offered proof. Together, they formed a pattern Penelope could not decorate herself into forgetting. "I won't wear them." Deborah's hand tightened around the wire stem. "You're nearly 30, dependent upon this house, and invited to one of the most important balls of the year. Don't mistake stubbornness for principle, and don't mistake fashion for innocence." Lady Clarissa Loxwood entered in a gold silk gown beneath an abundance of emerald ornaments. Rosettes crossed her bodice, circled one sleeve, and descended along her train. A narrow wreath rested in her fair hair. She should have looked triumphant. Instead, the powder beneath her eyes seemed too carefully applied, and she pressed 2 fingers briefly to her temple before lowering her hand. "Let her go plain, Mama," Clarissa said. "Perhaps someone will admire the courage of having nothing worth admiring." Penelope fastened the mother-of-pearl clasp at her left shoulder. It had belonged to her mother, who had worn it on uncoloured silk when Edward Loxwood's relations whispered that a manufacturer's daughter did not understand elegance. "Nothing is exactly what I intend to ask another woman to suffer for my gown," Penelope said. She left the green spray on the dressing table. 40 minutes later, Eastborough House blazed with candlelight. Emerald garlands climbed the columns of the ballroom. Artificial leaves framed the mirrors, and green roses floated among white lilies in silver bowls. The Duke of Eastborough's silk relief ball had drawn peers, merchants, politicians, and every family eager to be associated with profitable English manufacture. Malcolm Loxwood stood beneath a gilded arch, receiving congratulations as if the success of Winstead Green had already been declared. Penelope entered behind Deborah and Clarissa. For one suspended moment, the ballroom seemed to lose its breath. Ivory silk moved without glitter. No emerald flowers crowded her shoulders. No diamonds competed with the calm line of her throat. The mother-of-pearl clasp was her only ornament. 2 gentlemen stopped speaking. The younger son of a marquis turned fully toward her. A cluster of officers near the orchestra looked away, and then looked again. Penelope felt their attention pass over her like light across glass. It did not warm her. Most of them had seen her at dinners for years without remembering whether she preferred tea or coffee. Tonight, her simplicity appeared remarkable, only because the room had overdressed itself into sameness. Across the ballroom, Charles Pomeroy, Duke of Eastborough, noticed something else. The woman in ivory was not searching for approval. Her gaze moved past the gentleman watching her and settled upon Lady Clarissa's fan. A trace of green dust marked the upper rib. Charles had spent the evening accepting compliments on the subscription and listening to Malcolm describe English enterprise. He crossed the room before he had decided whether curiosity or concern had moved him. "Miss Loxwood," he said, after Deborah made the introduction, "you have caused a difficulty." Penelope met his eyes. "Have I, your grace?" "Half the gentlemen in my ballroom have forgotten why they came." "Then your charity was depending upon very weak discipline." His mouth almost curved. "A severe judgment, only an observable one." Malcolm stepped nearer. "My cousin's enjoys appearing above fashion." "No," Penelope said. "I object only when fashion requires silence." Clarissa opened her fan too quickly. Green powder drifted from its edge. Her breath caught, though she disguised it with a laugh. Penelope looked from the dust to the heavy rosettes upon Clarissa's train. "Are you unwell?" "I'm warm." "It's a ballroom. You were holding your head before we left." Deborah's smile sharpened. Penelope has developed an unfortunate interest in ordinary fatigue. Clarissa turned away. As she did, the lowest rosette caught against the heel of her slipper. Its securing thread snapped. The flower fell between Penelope and Charles. Malcolm bent at once. "Leave it," Penelope said. The quiet command stopped him. She signaled to a nearby writing desk. "Clean paper, please." Charles did not ask why. He took an unused sheet himself and placed it on the floor beside the flower. Penelope folded another sheet around her fingers, lifted the rosette without touching its dyed surface, and laid it upon the first. Under the candlelight, green dust clung to the paper. Charles watched her hands, then her face. "What do you believe this contains?" "I don't know." The answer surprised Malcolm, but women handling this color in Spitalfields have reported the same sickness. Headaches, nausea, pain in the throat, weakness that improves when they stop the work. "Trade gossip," Malcolm said. "You've brought workshop panic into a ducal ballroom." "I've brought no accusation," Penelope replied. "Only a flower that has shed powder beside a woman who is already unwell." Charles looked toward Clarissa. Her posture remained elegant, but one hand had closed around her fan hard enough to whiten the knuckles. He turned to his steward. "Mr. Hale, bring a clean stoppered jar and a silver salver." Malcolm lowered his voice. "Your Grace, a public fuss will damage the subscription. Then we won't make one." Charles addressed the nearest footman. "Open the terrace doors. Remove every matching green garland from the supper room. Use cloth, not bare hands, and carry them away without shaking them." "You're treating Miss Loxwood's fancy as fact," Malcolm said. "No, I'm treating uncertainty as a reason not to expose my guests further." The reply traveled no farther than those nearest, but its effect was immediate. Mr. Hale returned with the jar. Before Lady Teresa Pomeroy and the steward, Charles watched Penelope guide the paper-wrapped rosette onto the salver. Mr. Hale placed it inside the jar, sealed the stopper, and carried it to the locked plate room under Charles's instruction. Penelope did not touch the flower again. The orchestra continued. Conversations resumed, thinner and more watchful than before. Deborah drew Clarissa toward the retiring room, insisting that a little water would settle her. Malcolm followed after promising Charles that Winstead would provide a fresh specimen from untouched stock. Penelope remained beside the writing desks, suddenly isolated by the space society created around a woman who had spoken an inconvenient possibility aloud. Charles came to stand near her, not in front of her, not close enough to claim familiarity, near enough that curious guests could not surround her without passing his notice. "Would you prefer to leave?" he asked. Penelope looked toward the open terrace doors, then toward the ballroom that had stared at her gown, and now feared her judgment. "No," Why stay? Because if I leave, Malcolm will say I withdrew the moment someone questioned me. Charles held her gaze. In it, he found neither triumph nor fearlessness. He found a woman who understood the price of remaining and had chosen it anyway. Then stay, he said, and tomorrow will you tell me what the women who made those flowers have been afraid to say? The ballroom recovered its music before it recovered its ease. Couples returned to the floor. Servants carried away the last green garlands from the supper room, and conversation resumed in careful fragments that pretended nothing unusual had occurred. Penelope remained near the writing desk, while Lady Deborah led Clarissa toward the retiring room, and Malcolm followed with the rigid courtesy of a man already composing his defense. Charles did not remain at Penelope's side long enough to make the protection look possessive. He spoke briefly with his steward, confirmed that the sealed jar had been placed in the locked plate room, then returned to receive 2 late-arriving families. Even so, the space around Penelope changed. 3 gentlemen who had watched her enter now sought introductions through a mutual acquaintance. The first praised the simplicity of her gown. The second asked whether ivory was becoming fashionable. The third told her that restraint was more striking than jewels. Penelope answered each with civility and none with encouragement. Their admiration had arrived after the Duke's attention and would probably depart with the next novelty. She had no wish to mistake borrowed curiosity for regard. When Charles approached again, the orchestra had begun the opening bars of a waltz. "Miss Loxwood, may I ask you to dance?" Penelope looked toward the retiring room door. "My cousin may still be unwell. Lady Teresa is with her. The physician attached to my household has also been sent for, though Lady Deborah insists water and quiet will be sufficient. And the flower, still sealed. No one has entered the plate room except Mr. Hale, who remains outside it." He offered no arm before she answered. Penelope placed her gloved hand lightly upon his sleeve. "Then yes, Your Grace," the room noticed. She felt a tension gather again as Charles led her onto the floor, but the waltz gave them a kind of privacy no drawing room could have offered. Malcolm could not interrupt without creating the spectacle he claimed to fear. Charles kept the proper distance between them and waited until the turn carried them beyond the nearest cluster of listeners. "You said the women were afraid to speak," he said. "Afraid of whom? Of losing work first, of being called troublesome second, of being disbelieved always. Do they work for Lord Winstead directly? Some do piecework through finishing rooms that receive Winstead orders. Others handle the petals after they've been cut elsewhere. The labor moves through enough hands that every proprietor can claim not to know what happens beyond his own door. And Mrs. Bessett? She owns a small workroom in Spitalfields. She's a widow, and she pays women by the promised day. That alone makes her unusual enough to be mistrusted by men who prefer accounts without faces." Charles guided them through the next turn. "How do you know the trade so well?" "My mother's father began with a narrow warehouse and 3 looms. By the time I was born, he supplied silk to half the better dressmakers in London. He believed a lady should know the weight of what she wore and the name of the hand that finished it." "Your father's family approved?" Penelope's mouth moved faintly. "They approved of the fortune. They were less certain about the lessons. And you kept them. Some lessons improve when society dislikes them." Charles looked at her more directly. "Do you always choose battles that may turn an entire room against you?" "Silence is also a choice. It simply sends the cost elsewhere. The answer followed them through half a measure. Then a young couple ahead mistimed their turn. Charles saw the collision before it happened. He shifted his own step, but did not tighten his hold or pull Penelope off balance. He gave her room. Penelope corrected smoothly, and their gloved fingers brushed when her hand settled again. The contact lasted no longer than the music required. Yet she felt the care in what he had not done. He had not assumed fear. He had not mistaken guidance for command. "You recover quickly," he said. "I had warning. Not much. Enough." They completed the figure as Lady Clarissa returned to the ballroom on Lady Teresa's arm. The green wreath had been removed from her hair, but the rosettes remained upon her gown. Her colour had improved only because fresh powder concealed the pallor beneath it. Deborah followed, smiling too brightly. Clarissa saw Penelope dancing with Charles and paused. Hurt passed across her face before pride covered it. When the waltz ended, she approached while several guests were still close enough to hear. "How fortunate," Clarissa said. "Miss Loxwood's undyed virtue has proved more entertaining than Winstead Green." Deborah murmured her name in warning, but Clarissa continued. "Perhaps plainness is the newest extravagance. Only a woman very certain of being noticed could afford so little." Penelope released Charles's sleeve before answering. "Plainness costs less than a gown that requires a sick girl to make it." The words were quiet. They did not need force. Clarissa's expression tightened. For one instant, Penelope saw fear beneath the insult. Not only fear of losing attention, but fear that the pain behind her eyes might have meaning. Malcolm arrived before Clarissa could reply. "This has gone far enough. My sister is tired, and my cousin has allowed workshop tales to become a private obsession." Charles could have answered for Penelope. He did not. He looked at her, leaving the choice in her hands. "I've made no public accusation," she said. "I asked that one fallen flower be preserved and that a pattern of illness be examined. You've embarrassed my family in the Duke's house. If a sealed flower can embarrass a venture, the venture was already fragile." A few listeners lowered their eyes. Malcolm's smile remained, but the skin around it had gone still. "I'll provide a fresh flower from untouched stock tomorrow. When it proves harmless, perhaps you'll withdraw these suggestions." "A comparison would be useful," Penelope said, "provided someone independent receives both samples." Charles spoke then. "Mr. Tobias Wren will do so. He has no connection to the Winstead venture or House Pomeroy's commercial trustees." Malcolm's gaze sharpened. "House Pomeroy has no commercial interest in my venture beyond patronage." "That is what I believed," Charles said. Lady Teresa had come to stand beside him. In her hand was the printed subscription list from the entrance hall. She unfolded it and pointed to a line beneath the heading for Winstead Green. Charles read the words once, then again, patron and investor. His Grace, the Duke of Eastborough. The ballroom seemed suddenly too warm. Penelope watched the change in his face. It was not embarrassment alone. It was the recognition that someone had placed his honor between the venture and every question society might otherwise have asked. "Was that printed with your approval?" she asked. Charles did not protect himself with delay. "No." Malcolm gave a short laugh. "A matter of enthusiastic wording. Your trustees approved the subscriptions support months ago." "Support is not investment." Charles folded the list with measured care. "Tomorrow morning, I'll examine every paper bearing my name." "There is no need to involve Miss Loxwood in private business," Malcolm said. "There is every need," Charles replied. Her warning exposed the question. "She will hear the answer." Penelope studied him. He might discover nothing more than careless phrasing. He might discover his title had been used to shelter a lie. Either possibility could be managed quietly if he chose rank over truth. Charles met her gaze. "Tomorrow, we begin with Mrs. Bessett," he said. "Then we learn exactly what my name has financed." The papers Charles placed upon the morning room table were more damaging than the printed subscription list had suggested. They bore his signature beneath a general authorization, dated 8 months earlier, permitting the Pomeroy trustees to invest in English manufacture when they judged the enterprise sound. A second document recorded an initial advance of £6,000. A third showed that an Eastborough warehouse had been leased to the Winstead venture at a favourable rate, while trust funds had paid for finishing tables, drying frames, wire tools, and imported colouring materials. Penelope read each page without haste. Lady Teresa sat near the window. Mrs. Bessett, still in her respectable black bombazine, kept her gloves folded in her lap. Mr. Tobias Wren stood beside the table with a narrow notebook open. Charles remained opposite Penelope, not behind the shelter of his desk. "You signed the authorization," she said. "I did. Did you approve these individual expenses?" "No. The trustees did so under the power I gave them." "And did you ever visit the warehouse?" "No." The answer came without defense. "I received summaries. They described a promising venture, rising demand, and employment for English workers." Penelope looked at the neat columns again. They didn't describe the rooms where the colour was handled. "No. Do you want this inquiry stopped before it reaches House Pomeroy?" Mrs. Bessett looked up sharply, but Charles did not. His attention remained on Penelope. "If my name made questions less likely, then my name makes them more necessary now." The room held still for a moment. He had not asked her to admire the answer. He had simply given it. Mr. Wren drew one of the papers closer. "Your Grace, I'll need copies of the authorization, the disbursement schedule, and the warehouse lease. The originals should remain where they are until I can record their condition. You'll have them." Charles turned to Mrs. Bessett. "Miss Loxwood said the women were afraid to speak. I won't ask for names they haven't consented to give." Some of the tension left Mrs. Bessett's shoulders. She opened a plain portfolio and removed 3 folded notes. "These are in the women's own hands. Their initials are mine, not theirs. I changed them before leaving Spitalfields." Wren nodded. "I can record the symptoms without identifying the writers." Mrs. Bessett laid the first note before him. "This one finished green petals 3 days each week. Headache by noon. Sickness by evening. Better after Sunday. Worse again on Tuesday." The second described burning in the throat and weakness in the fingers. The third mentioned green dust lodged in cuffs and beneath fingernails despite washing. "Did they handle any other colors?" Charles asked. "Blue, white, and yellow," Mrs. Bessett replied. "They complained of tired eyes and sore backs with those, as women do after long work. The vomiting and throat pain came with the green." "How many women?" "Enough to see a pattern. Not enough to survive being called liars by a titled patron." Charles absorbed that in silence. Penelope watched him resist the instinct to promise protection he had not yet earned the right to offer. Instead, he asked, "What would allow them to speak safely?" Mrs. Bessett considered. "Independent records. No house servant standing over them. No payment for the statement. And no gentleman announcing beforehand what he expects them to say." "Then that is how it will be done," Charles said. A knock sounded at the door. Mr. Hale entered, carrying the stoppered jar from the ball upon a silver salver. The wax impressed around the stopper remained unbroken. "The jar has not left the locked plate room since last night, Your Grace," he said. "I kept the key. No one entered except me, and only to retrieve it at your written order." Wren inspected the wax without touching it. Lady Teresa came forward to confirm the mark she had witnessed at the ball. Penelope remained where she stood. Rosetta still lay inside the jar upon the folded paper, its emerald petals bright beneath the glass. Charles looked at Wren. "What is required?" "A written description of the jar, the seal, and every hand through which it passes. Mr. Hale should state when he received it. Lady Teresa should confirm the seal. Then I can take it directly to an independent chemist." "Who chooses the chemist?" Penelope asked. "I do," Wren said. "Not His Grace, not Lord Winstead, not Mrs. Bessett. I'll also require a second specimen for comparison." Charles glanced at her. "You anticipated that. One flower can prove what is in one flower," Penelope said. "It cannot prove what is in every Winstead ornament." "Then we don't ask it to." Mr. Hale described the jar and signed Wren's receipt. Lady Teresa added her name beneath his. Wren accepted the salver, placed the jar inside a padded compartment of his case, and locked it. Rosette A had now left Eastborough keeping and entered his. Charles wrote a short instruction authorizing payment of the chemist's fee through Wren. Before sanding the ink, he added another line. "The fee confers no right of prior review, suppression, or alteration upon House Pomeroy." Wren read it and gave a small nod. "That will do." Mrs. Bessett then opened a second packet. Inside lay a narrow strip of ivory silk cut from the edge of a worktable covering. A faint green haze marked one side. "This wasn't part of a finished flower," she said. "It lay beneath the women's hands while they worked." Penelope carried the strip toward the window. Charles moved with her, stopping at the other end of the fabric only when she held it out. "Will you take that side?" she asked. "Yes." He pinched the clean edge between thumb and forefinger. Together they lifted the silk into the daylight. Green dust showed where the weave crossed itself. Penelope changed the angle. The powder had settled not only upon the surface, but between the threads, as if ordinary handling had driven it inward. Their sleeves came close enough that she became aware of the stillness in his posture. He did not lean nearer. He did not turn the shared task into an excuse for intimacy. Yet when she raised her eyes, his were already on hers. "It transfers without pressure," he said. "Yes, then a girl doesn't need to crush the petals to carry it home. No, she only needs to work." The truth remained suspended between them, with the strip of silk. Charles looked back toward the table where his investment papers lay. "My reports praised the number of hands employed. Reports often count hands more easily than they count harm." His expression tightened, but he did not release the silk. "You think I preferred not to know? I think powerful men are often given information arranged to preserve their comfort. The question is what they do when the arrangement becomes visible." Charles met her gaze again. "Then watch what I do." Footsteps sounded in the corridor before Penelope could answer. A footman entered, carrying a small polished box sealed with dark green wax. "Delivered from Loxwood House, Your Grace. Lord Winstead's note says it contains an untouched flower from the same manufacture." Malcolm's confidence seemed to enter the room with the box. Wren set his locked case upon the table, but did not open it. He examined the seal from a distance, recorded the Loxwood crest, and read the attached note aloud. The box would remain unopened until both specimens could be examined before witnesses. Charles looked from the sealed box to Penelope. "If this one is clean, then we learn the difference between them," she said. "And if it is not, then we learn something worse. Wren placed the box in a separate compartment of his case. The two flowers now travelled under the same lock, but not the same story. One had fallen from Clarissa's train. The other had been selected by Malcolm himself. Tomorrow, beneath a chemist's light, only one of those stories could remain simple. The copper began to darken before Malcolm Loxwood stopped smiling. It happened in Mr. Harland's rooms near Long Acre, beneath a high window that admitted the pale light of a London morning. The polished strip had been bright when the chemist placed it above the prepared glass vessel. Now a shadow spread across its surface, first grey, then nearly black, delicate as soot and impossible to mistake. No one spoke. Mr. Tobias Wren stood beside the table with his notebook open. Lady Teresa remained near Penelope, while Charles watched from the opposite side without moving. Mrs. Bessett stared at the darkening copper as though she could see every workroom woman reflected in it. Malcolm had entered the examination with the confidence of a man certain that uncertainty would protect him. That confidence altered by degrees. "What does it mean?" Charles asked. Harland did not answer until he had completed the second stage of the examination. He had opened Rosette A only after Wren confirmed the unbroken seal and read aloud the written history of its transfer from Eastborough House. A single small petal had been clipped from the artificial flower. The remainder had been returned to its stoppered jar, and Wren had resealed it before the test began. Mr. Harland now lowered the darkened copper and inspected it beneath a magnifying lens. "The result is consistent with an arsenical green pigment," he said. Malcolm recovered first. Consistent is not conclusive. For this fragment, the result is conclusive enough to require a second examination by another method. Mr. Harland prepared a fresh portion from the same clipped petal rather than taking more material from the sealed remainder. He worked without theatrical haste. The room filled with the faint mineral odor of the reagents and the quieter sound of Wren's pen. When the second test produced the expected deposit, Mr. Harland removed his spectacles. The fragment from Rosette A contains an arsenical compound. Mrs. Bessett closed her eyes briefly. The girls said their mouths tasted like metal by evening. Charles looked at her. "How many handled flowers from this particular order?" "I don't know yet. Work passes from cutter to folder to finisher. Some women take bundles home. Others share tables. A single crate can pass through dozens of hands before it reaches a lady's gown." Malcolm gave a restrained exhale. "And one contaminated flower can pass through a ballroom, a carriage floor, or a servant's hands before anyone seals it. You've proved only that this fragment contained arsenic when it reached the chemist." Penelope turned toward him. "The flower fell directly from Clarissa's train. I lifted it with clean paper. Mr. Hales sealed it before witnesses. No one handled the dyed surface. You handled the paper. Then test the comparison specimen you selected yourself." Malcolm's gaze shifted to the polished box in Wren's case. "Gladly." Wren placed the box upon the table. The dark green wax still bore the Loxwood crest. He recorded its condition, then broke the seal in the presence of every witness. Inside lay a single artificial rosette arranged upon white tissue. Its color was slightly cooler than Rosette A's, though the difference could have been dismissed as candlelight or workmanship. Mr. Harland removed a small fragment and returned the box to Wren, who resealed the remaining flower. The first test produced no dark deposit. The second gave no comparable result. Malcolm's relief entered his face before he could conceal it. "There," he said, "the same manufacture, untouched stock, harmless." Penelope did not look at him. She examined the clipped edges of the two tested fragments, where the construction beneath the petals had been exposed. They aren't the same. You've just heard the chemist. I'm speaking of the workmanship. She leaned closer without touching either fragment. Rosette A is secured around a twisted cream core. The thread was left undyed beneath the petals. Rosette B uses a straight green thread. Mrs. Bessett moved to the table. She's right. Mr. Harland shifted the lamp so they could see more clearly. Beneath Rosette A's emerald folds ran a cream thread made from two strands twisted together. The stitches were longer and less regular. Rosette B's center held a single straight green thread, nearly concealed against the petals. Its stitches were short, even, and finished beneath a tighter knot. Manufacture varies, Malcolm said. Women make these by hand. No two flowers will be identical. Variation is not the same as a separate method, Mrs. Bessett replied. The twisted thread is used in the east of city finishing rooms because it's cheap and holds when the petals are pulled tight. The green thread costs more. I've seen it on presentation pieces from a small Clerkenwell supplier. You've seen thread in hundreds of workshops. Yes, that's why I know the difference. Malcolm looked at Charles. Your Grace, this is becoming absurd. One flower contains something objectionable. One does not. Now we are invited to condemn a venture because two seamstresses tied different knots. Mrs. Bessett is not condemning the venture, Charles said. She is identifying evidence that your comparison specimen may not have come from the same production line. It came from Winstead's stock. That was not the question. Malcolm's color rose. No one has died. Artificial colors have been used in gowns, wallpapers, ribbons, and furnishings for years. Women in workrooms suffer headaches because they work long hours in close rooms. If every complaint stopped production, half of London would be unemployed by Michaelmas. Penelope met his gaze. A powerful man should not require a funeral before he admits suffering. The words landed without heat. That made them harder to dismiss. Malcolm's jaw tightened. You have no proof that any worker's illness came from these flowers. Not yet. Penelope turned back to the table. But the positive sample came from ordinary wear. The clean sample came from your hand. Their materials differ. Their stitching differs. Their thread differs. That is enough to ask where each was made. Mr. Harland nodded. The chemical finding establishes only the tested fragments. The construction may establish a separate commercial question. Wren recorded the distinction in careful language. Rosette A had tested positive. Rosette B had not. Rosette A used twisted cream core thread and longer ordinary stitches. Rosette B used straight green thread and finer finishing. Neither result proved the contents of every Winstead flower. Together, however, they made the claim of identical manufacture doubtful. Malcolm crossed to the window. What do you intend to do with this? Charles answered before Penelope could. Nothing publicly today. Malcolm turned, surprised. Then you acknowledge the matter has been exaggerated. No, I acknowledge that evidence should not be made larger or smaller than it is. Charles rested one hand against the back of an empty chair. Rosette A is dangerous. Rosette B is not. They differ materially. We will learn why. And while you indulge this inquiry, my creditors will hear whispers. Orders will be withdrawn. Men and women will lose wages. Then you should be eager to identify the safe production line and remove any unsafe stock before whispers become facts. Malcolm's eyes hardened. You are allowing Miss Loxwood to direct you. Charles looked across the room at Penelope. She stood beside Mrs. Bessett, her mother-of-pearl clasp, catching a narrow line of daylight. He remembered the silk strip held between them at Eastborough House, and the question she had placed before him, without softening it. What would he do when the arrangement became visible? Miss Loxwood asked questions my own reports did not, he said. That does not make the answers hers. Penelope held his gaze. There was no intimacy in the exchange that anyone else could name, yet something steadier than attraction passed between them. He had not declared her right because he wished to please her. He had refused to call her wrong because truth remained inconvenient. Wren locked both resealed specimens in separate compartments of his case. The next step is to trace the thread and the supply records, he said. Mrs. Bessett looked again at Rosette B through the glass panel of the case. The clean flower wasn't made in my district. Penelope asked, where was it made? Somewhere that expected the finished work to be inspected. Malcolm said nothing. That silence answered more than his denials had done. If one flower had been prepared for fashionable scrutiny and another for ordinary sale, the danger was no accident of careless workmanship. Someone had decided that certain customers deserved safety, while others deserved only beauty. Charles placed the warehouse lease and investment memorandum before Penelope, before Mr. Wren asked to see them. The meeting took place in the Eastborough morning room on the 23rd of June, with Lady Teresa beside the open window and Wren standing near the writing table. The documents were not copies prepared to flatter House Pomeroy. They showed exactly what Charles's general authorization had allowed. Eastborough Capital had paid for finishing tables, drying frames, wire tools, storage fittings, and imported coloring materials. The Pomeroy Trust also held the warehouse lease and had granted Malcolm's venture favorable terms. You could have waited until Mr. Wren found these, Penelope said. Yes. Charles did not sit. Why? Didn't you? Because every hour I keep a damaging fact private becomes a choice rather than an oversight. Wren examined the papers and began making a written list of the originals that would later be delivered under receipt. Penelope looked again at the equipment account. Several entries had been approved under broad language describing improved employment and English manufacture. Nothing mentioned ventilation, protective handling, or the difference between ordinary and presentation stock. Responsibility begins when a powerful man discovers his comfort was purchased by someone else's silence, she said. Charles held her gaze. Then I've reached the beginning. He gave Wren permission to copy the lease and memorandum without retaining prior review. Within the hour, they left for the Eastborough leased warehouse near the river. Penelope and Lady Teresa rode with Charles. Wren followed in a second carriage with his locked evidence case, which still contained the separately resealed rosettes A and B. No specimen was opened during the journey. The streets narrowed as they approached the warehouses, and the air grew heavier with coal smoke, damp timber, and the sharp odors of dye and river water. Mr. Cole, the warehouse manager, met them beneath a covered loading entrance. He was a square-built man with ink on one cuff and the cautious expression of someone who had recently been given 2 sets of orders by men of unequal rank. "Your Grace," he said, "I wasn't told to expect you." "That was deliberate," Charles replied. "You'll show us the warehouse as it stands." Cole glanced toward Penelope and Lady Teresa. "There are rough passages inside. Miss Loxwood understands workrooms better than most trustees," Charles said. "Lady Teresa is here by my request. Mr. Wren will record what we find." The loading platform narrowed beside a gap where one plank had been removed for repair. Penelope, could have crossed it alone. But the hem of her walking dress caught briefly against a raised nail. Charles stopped beside her without taking her arm. He extended his gloved hand, palm upward. "May I?" Penelope looked at the gap, then at him. "Yes." She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed only enough to steady her as she stepped across. The contact was brief, deliberate, and more intimate than their accidental touch during the waltz, because both had chosen it. The moment her footing was secure, Charles released her. He did not turn courtesy into possession. Cole led them first through the ordinary storage room. 5 wooden crates remained beneath the high rafters. Pale rectangles in the dust marked the places where 12 others had stood. Loose artificial petals, wire stems, and coils of twisted cream thread occupied open bins along one wall. Mrs. Bessett's description returned to Penelope at once. The thread matched the construction recorded for Rosette A. "How many crates were here at the beginning of the week?" Wren asked. 17, Cole replied. "Where are the others?" Cole hesitated. Charles said nothing. He did not remind the man whose family held the lease. He waited for an answer that could be given without visible coercion. "Sent to Loxwood House," Cole said at last. "Lord Winstead's written instruction. There for Lady Clarissa's fashion assembly." Penelope moved closer to the empty spaces without stepping inside them. "All 12? "Yes, miss." "Ordinary stock?" "Yes." "When is the assembly?" 4 days from now. The knowledge settled heavily. 12 crates could dress every model in the program and cover the rooms besides. Wren recorded the count and asked Cole to produce the dispatch note. Cole brought it from a desk drawer. Malcolm's signature appeared beneath the order, together with instructions that no crate was to be delayed for inspection. Charles read the page once. No further stock, pigment, tools, records, or finished goods will leave this warehouse without a written inventory signed by you and witnessed by Mr. Wren's clerk. Cole looked relieved rather than alarmed. "Yes, Your Grace. Lord Winstead retains whatever access the lease permits," Charles continued. "You will not obstruct him. You will record every object moved. Understood?" Penelope saw the distinction. Charles had not seized Malcolm's property or destroyed stock. He had used the lease only to prevent evidence from vanishing unrecorded. Cole then unlocked a narrow room at the rear of the warehouse. The difference was immediate. The presentation room was clean, dry, and ordered. Finished flowers rested in polished boxes lined with tissue. The thread on the work table was straight and green. The petals had a softer color than the ordinary stock and shed no visible dust when Cole lifted one box by its base. "These are made in Clerkenwell," he said. "A small supplier, higher cost, slower work." Wren set his evidence case upon a clear table but did not unlock it. Through the glass panel, Rosette B's straight green core could be seen beneath its petals. Penelope compared it with the thread on the presentation table. "It matches. And Rosette A?" Charles asked. "The twisted cream thread in the ordinary room." Cole's face had lost color. "I was told the difference was finish quality." "Who told you?" Wren asked. "Lord Winstead's clerk." "Did he explain why investors received different stock?" Cole looked toward the doorway. A thin warehouse boy stood there carrying a bundle of labels. He could not have been more than 14. When he realized everyone had seen him, he froze. Penelope spoke gently. "You won't be punished for hearing something said in your place of work." The boy looked at Cole before answering. The manager gave a small nod. "I heard the clerk when the last presentation boxes went out," the boy said. He told another man, "The safe ones are for investors. The others are for the ladies." Silence filled the room. Charles looked at the polished boxes, then through the glass at Rosette B. His name had not merely purchased equipment. It had helped create a room where safety itself became part of the presentation offered to men with power. Penelope returned to the ordinary storage room and looked at the 12 pale marks in the dust. Somewhere across London, Clarissa's household was opening those crates and fastening the flowers to gowns. Someone had divided beauty into two kinds, one for those powerful enough to inspect it, another for everyone expected only to wear it. By the morning of the 26th June, the twisted cream thread had become more troubling than the green pigment itself. Pigment could be denied as contamination. A different method of construction suggested intention. Penelope stood beside the long cutting table in Mrs. Bessett's Spitalfields workroom while pale summer light fell across invoices, retained thread bundles, and Mr. Wren's written descriptions of rosettes A and B. The 2 sealed flowers remained in his locked evidence case at Lincoln's Inn. Nothing from either specimen had been brought into the workroom. Mrs. Bessett placed 3 small bundles upon clean white paper. 2 had been retained from ordinary Winstead orders completed during the previous month. The 3rd came from a costly Clerkenwell supplier used for presentation pieces. Charles stood at the table's far end with Lady Teresa beside him. He had come without a footman in the room, and without any Pomeroy servant near the women at work beyond the open door. Penelope lifted one ordinary bundle with a pair of wooden pincers. Its core was cream-colored and made from 2 strands twisted together. This matches the construction Mr. Wren recorded for Rosette A. Mrs. Bessett nodded, and the stock we saw in the ordinary warehouse room. Penelope indicated the 2nd bundle. It was the same. The 3rd lay straight and evenly green, finer than the others, and almost entirely concealed when used beneath petals. And this matches Rosette B, Charles said. Yes, Penelope replied. It also matches the thread in the presentation room. Wren made a brief entry in his notebook. The distinction supports 2 production lines. It doesn't establish the chemical composition of every ornament made with either thread. Then we need more ornaments, Lady Teresa said. Penelope turned one of Mrs. Bessett's invoices toward her. 6 titled, Women had purchased Winstead sprays from ordinary London stock during the previous 5 weeks. The owners must remove the flowers themselves, Penelope said. They should place each one in unused paper before a witness, seal it with their own crest, and send it directly to Mr. Wren. Charles looked over the names. I can require every subscriber to provide 1 sample. No. The answer came quickly enough to silence the room. Penelope set down the pincers. A command from you would weaken what we are trying to establish. It would guarantee cooperation. It would guarantee surrender, not truth. Malcolm would say the women acted under ducal pressure. Some may send unused presentation pieces to avoid offending either side. Others may say whatever they think Eastborough wishes to hear. Charles held her gaze. Rank had trained men to treat obedience as efficiency. Penelope could see the instinct to act rising in him, followed by the deliberate choice not to indulge it. What would you have me do? He asked. Nothing, publicly. Let Lady Teresa approach them as women, not as subjects of your authority. Make it clear that refusal carries no consequence. Let each owner control the first handling of her own ornament. Lady Teresa drew the invoice closer. Lady Martindale complained that a green spray marked her opera gloves. She may listen. She may also fear admitting she exposed her maid, Penelope said. Then I'll ask without accusation. Charles gave a single nod, no command. The simplicity of his acceptance moved Penelope more than a grand promise would have done. He had offered power because power was the tool he knew best. When she explained why it would harm the inquiry, he put it down. A young assistant passed the doorway carrying a tray of folded petals. At the sight of Charles, she slowed. Penelope crossed toward her, but stopped before entering the workroom. "No one will ask for your name without permission," she said, "and no statement will be taken in His Grace's presence unless you request it." The girl glanced toward Mrs. Bessette, then back to Penelope. "Thank you, miss." Charles said nothing. His silence preserved the promise better than reassurance from a duke might have done. Lady Teresa began her calls that afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the first refusal arrived. Lady Martindale claimed the ornaments had been misplaced. A second woman sent word that her maid had discarded them after the dye stained a ribbon. A third returned Teresa's calling card without receiving her. With the card came a folded scrap copied from a drawing-room conversation. Miss Loxwood, it declared, had mistaken one evening of male admiration for social consequence, and now sought to destroy Lady Clarissa's success from jealousy. The language did not bear Deborah's signature, but Penelope recognized the method. Deborah had taken the title's promise and sharpened it against her. Every nobleman had looked at Penelope. Therefore, society was invited to believe she could not endure their looking at Clarissa next. "She has moved faster than we have," Teresa said. "Rumor travels without receipts," Penelope replied. "Evidence carries weight." A second note arrived near dusk. It bore no signature and no crest. The writer said she possessed a Winstead ornament that had left green powder inside its box. She would permit a sample to be taken, but only after the Loxwood assembly, when her name could no longer cost her an invitation. Wren read the note twice. "There is no way to verify the sender yet." "No," Penelope said. "But someone is frightened enough to write, and not yet brave enough to be known. After the assembly may be too late," Charles said. No one disputed him. That evening, Penelope dined quietly at Eastborough House with Charles and Lady Teresa. The table was small enough for conversation and formal enough to preserve propriety. Wren had returned to Lincoln's Inn with his papers. The anonymous note lay folded beside Teresa's plate. They had begun discussing which owners might be approached through dressmakers rather than drawing rooms when Penelope reached for her water glass and felt the mother-of-pearl clasp shift at her left shoulder. One fastening had loosened. She covered it with her hand before the ivory silk could slip. Charles noticed immediately. He rose, moved half a pace to block the sightline from the footman at the sideboard, and turned his shoulder toward the room. He did not reach for the clasp. He did not ask to fasten it. Within the privacy his position created, Penelope secured the pin herself. "Thank you," she said when it was firm. Charles resumed his seat. "I thought privacy would be more useful than assistance." It was. Her fingers rested briefly over the clasp. "It belonged to my mother. The manufacturer's daughter your father's family admired chiefly for her fortune." Penelope looked at him, surprised that he remembered. "Yes, she wore this on plain gowns when the Loxwoods suggested she lacked refinement. She taught me that simplicity could be a moral choice, not an absence. A woman might remove ornament because she had decided what she would not ask another person to endure for it." Charles glanced toward the anonymous note. "My mother taught me almost the opposite lesson. She believed responsible rank meant appearing certain, even when certainty had to be manufactured. Did you believe her for most of my life?" His expression remained composed, but his voice changed. People are reassured when a duke sounds certain. Trustees move more quickly. Servants worry less. Investors obey. It's convenient enough that a man can forget to ask whether his certainty is protecting anyone but himself. Penelope met his eyes across the table. Honest uncertainty can protect people. It leaves room for facts to enter. Then I'll try not to close the door before they arrive. A footman entered carrying a cream envelope marked with the Loxwood seal. It was addressed to Penelope. Inside lay Clarissa's printed program for the Fashion Assembly on the 28th of June. Beneath Clarissa's name appeared the promised centerpiece of the evening, a complete emerald procession presenting the full Winstead collection. Every model would wear ordinary Winstead green. Penelope looked from the program to the unsigned note. The one owner willing to help would wait until after the event. Clarissa and the other women would not. "We have 2 days," she said. Charles did not reach for the program. "Then we use them without forcing the truth into a shape Malcolm can break." By 9:30 on the evening of the 28th of June, Loxwood House had become an emerald trap. Green garlands climbed the mirrors. Artificial leaves overflowed gilt baskets, and every lamp seemed to sharpen the color until it no longer resembled anything that had grown in earth. Penelope stood near the edge of the great drawing room in pale cream silk, her mother-of-pearl clasp secure at her left shoulder, and watched the first models gather beneath the musicians' gallery. Lady Martindale still claimed her ornaments were lost. Another patron said her maid had discarded them. The unnamed woman who had written to Lady Teresa would surrender a flower only after the assembly. By then, the ordinary Winstead stock would already have passed beneath the chandeliers on the bodies of 12 women. Deborah's rumor had also done its work. Guests who had once looked at Penelope with curiosity now watched her as though jealousy might be detected in the angle of her chin. Lady Teresa remained beside her. Charles stood across the room with Mr. Wren, careful not to turn his concern into a public declaration Malcolm could use. Rosettes A and B were not present. Both remained sealed in Wren's evidence case at Lincoln's Inn. Clarissa appeared at the top of the shallow stair, and applause rose before anyone looked closely enough to see her. Pale gold silk disappeared beneath a complete emerald arrangement. Rosettes clustered across her bodice, circled her sleeves, and descended along a heavy train, a narrow wreath pressed against her fair hair. She looked brilliant from a distance. Up close, Penelope saw powder, laid too carefully over pallor, a faint tremor in the hand, resting on the banister, and the quick rise of a chest that could not draw a full breath. Deborah waited below with the rigid smile of a woman who had staked more than fashion on the procession. Malcolm offered Clarissa his arm. "You see," Deborah murmured as Penelope passed, "no one's ill, no one's afraid. Only you insist upon turning beauty into accusation." Penelope did not answer. The quartet began. Clarissa led 6 models through the drawing room toward the adjoining gallery. With each step, green dust loosened from the flowers and caught the light. Halfway through the first circuit, Clarissa faltered. Malcolm tightened his hold and smiled toward the guests. "A loose hem," he said. Clarissa tried to continue. Her eyes moved over the room until they found Penelope. The triumph had gone from them. Penelope crossed the floor. One of the gentlemen who had sought an introduction at Eastborough House saw her coming and stepped backward, as though rumor itself might stain his coat. "Clarissa," Penelope said. "Don't make a scene," Deborah whispered. Clarissa lifted her chin. "I'm quite well." Her voice was barely stronger than breath. Penelope saw green residue along the edge of her glove and moisture at her temples. You can't breathe properly. It's warm. You've been ill before tonight. Clarissa's gaze flicked toward her mother. Deborah's face hardened. She's got duties. Clarissa swayed. Charles was already moving through the guests, but Penelope reached her first. Look at me, she said. Clarissa did. For one instant, pride fell away. Take it away. Only Penelope heard. Penelope opened the small sewing case in her reticule and removed her silver embroidery scissors. She slipped a fold of Clarissa's own cream, underlining beneath the densest cluster to keep her hand from the dyed petals. Hold still. Deborah seized Penelope's wrist. What do you think you're doing? Charles's voice cut across the room. Release Miss Loxwood. Deborah obeyed before she appeared to choose. Penelope cut the first securing thread, then the second. The cluster loosened. Lady Teresa had already unfolded a clean white shawl. Penelope lowered the flowers onto it without letting the petals touch her skin. Green dust marked the cloth. Clarissa drew one strained breath. Then her knees gave way. Charles caught her beneath the arms and lowered her carefully while Teresa cleared the weighted train. Voices broke across the room. Open every window, Charles ordered. Send for the physician. Clear the gallery and the retiring room passage. Footmen moved at once. Deborah knelt beside Clarissa, calling her name, but did not touch the green wreath. Charles noticed. Remove the remaining ornaments with clean cloth, he said. Don't shake them. Malcolm stepped between the servants and his sister. No one touches Winstead property until we know what has happened. Your sister's breathing outranks your property, Charles said. Malcolm's control cracked. No one's died from a fashionable colour. If this assembly fails, Winstead credit fails with it. Hundreds depend upon those orders. Then you should have valued the people, filling them before the applause began. Penelope handed her scissors to Lady Teresa and indicated which threads could be cut without disturbing Clarissa's gown. She did not touch Clarissa's face or hands. The physician arrived, ordered fresh air, and had Clarissa carried to the retiring room with Deborah, Teresa, and a maid. Charles kept the guests from crowding the passage. When the door closed, Malcolm turned upon Penelope. You brought scissors to my house after warning that these flowers were poisoned. His voice carried easily through the silenced room. You cut my sister's gown, and she collapsed. She asked me to remove the flowers. No one heard her. I did. Deborah reappeared in the doorway, pale with fear and fury. At Eastborough House, every gentleman looked at Penelope. Tonight they came to admire Clarissa. She couldn't endure it. The lie fitted the rumour already waiting for it. Guests did not need proof when jealousy gave them a story they understood. The same gentleman who had stepped away now lowered his eyes rather than meet Penelope's. Malcolm pointed to the scissors in Teresa's hand and the green cluster on the shawl. Rosette A tested positive after passing through Miss Loxwood's paper. Rosette B, supplied from untouched stock, did not. Now she has handled another ornament at the exact moment Clarissa fell. Have her confined until the magistrate is summoned. Charles moved to Penelope's side, not in front of her. No one will confine Miss Loxwood. Then you declare her innocent? I declare only what I witnessed. Lady Clarissa showed visible distress. Miss Loxwood removed the cluster. I didn't hear a request, so I won't claim I did. I also saw no act of contamination. The physician's care comes first. The objects will go into independent keeping. His belief did not become false certainty for her sake. That honesty steadied Penelope more than any dramatic defense could have done. Mr. Wren approached with 2 unused evidence cloths, sealing wax, and his receipt book. Penelope held out her hand. "My scissors, please." Lady Teresa returned them by the handles. Penelope placed them upon the first cloth without wiping the green dust from the blades. "I surrender these voluntarily, provided their condition is recorded." Wren described the silver embroidery scissors, the visible dust and fibers, and every person present. He wrapped and sealed them as a separate object. Penelope then indicated the cluster on the shawl. "That came directly from Clarissa's bodice. Record it separately as Rosette F, the Clarissa cluster." Wren described the dense emerald rosettes, twisted cream securing thread, green residue, and the clean shawl used beneath them. He sealed Rosette F in a second packet with a different wax impression and wrote a separate receipt. Penelope, Lady Teresa, and Charles signed as witnesses. The scissors and Rosette F passed into Wren's keeping, but never into the same parcel. From the retiring room came a faint movement. Clarissa appeared for only an instant, supported by Teresa and the maid. Her eyes were unfocused. "Penelope cut them away," she whispered. Deborah seized the unfinished sentence. "You hear her. She admits it." Clarissa tried to speak again, but exhaustion closed her eyes. The physician ordered the door shut. In the silence that followed, Penelope understood that Malcolm had obtained exactly what he wanted. The truth had entered the room incomplete, and society had already chosen the missing half. By breakfast on the 29th of June, London had transformed Penelope's attempt to save Clarissa into a crime of envy. Notes passed between drawing rooms before the physician at Loxwood House had finished his second visit. One account claimed Penelope had carried poison in her reticule. Another said the scissors had been prepared in advance. The version Deborah encouraged required the least evidence and therefore travelled fastest. Every nobleman had looked at Penelope at Eastborough House, and she had been unable to endure Clarissa receiving the same attention. When Penelope entered Deborah's private drawing room, a prepared statement lay upon the writing desk beside an uncapped ink bottle. Malcolm stood near the fireplace. Deborah remained behind the desk, dressed with the severe precision of a woman who believed composure could command reality. "Sit down," she said. Penelope did not. "How is Clarissa?" "The physician says she requires quiet." "Is she conscious?" "At intervals," Malcolm replied. "She repeats that you cut the flowers away." "Because she asked me to." "No one heard her." "I did." Deborah placed 2 fingers upon the statement. "You'll sign this before luncheon. It says your concern about the Winstead flowers arose from nervous agitation and jealousy. It says you acted without Clarissa's permission and regret the distress caused to this family." Penelope read the first lines. They were carefully phrased. No word sounded cruel. Together, they would destroy every worker's testimony before any woman had given it. "You want me to confess to a lie so the venture can continue. I want you to prevent the ruin of your own family. Clarissa is ill." Clarissa was overheated. She suffered headaches before these assembly. She had throat pain. Her hands trembled after fittings. Deborah's gaze shifted only for a moment. Penelope saw the admission before it was spoken. "You knew?" Malcolm moved away from the fire. "Be careful. Did you know too?" Penelope asked him. "I knew she was tired. Every young woman is tired during the season. And you covered her with the heaviest collection in London." Deborah's hand flattened over the paper. "Do you imagine we had a choice? Winstead credit is nearly exhausted. Malcolm's venture was meant to restore confidence. Clarissa's assembly was meant to secure patronage, orders, and perhaps a marriage strong enough to protect what remains of this family. There it was. Not ignorance, calculation dressed as maternal duty. Penelope looked at her aunt across the desk. Then you asked Clarissa to wear the cost of saving House Loxwood on her body. Families survive because women understand sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't the same as being deceived. Malcolm's voice hardened. If the assembly failed, creditors would close the venture. Hundreds would lose work. You chose the cheaper pigment and sent the safe flowers to investors. You can't prove that. Not yet. Penelope returned the statement to the desk. But I won't help you make the truth harder to prove. Deborah's face became still. If you leave this house without signing, you won't return. Penelope thought of the room upstairs where she had lived by permission, the meals at which trade could be discussed only as profit, and the years spent making herself agreeable enough not to threaten anyone's comfort. The loss hurt. It did not alter her decision. Then I won't return. She packed without a maid. 2 plain day gowns, 1 evening dress, underlinen, correspondence from Mrs. Bessett, her personal purse, and the sewing case that had belonged to her mother went into a modest trunk. The case contained needles, thread, chalk, and spare pins, but not the silver embroidery scissors. Those remained separately sealed in Mr. Wren's keeping. Rosette F, the cluster cut from Clarissa's bodice, remained under its own seal with him as well. Penelope fastened the mother-of-pearl clasp at her left shoulder, took nothing purchased by Deborah or Malcolm, and descended to the hall. Charles and Lady Teresa were waiting beneath the chandelier. Charles looked first at Penelope, then at the trunk beside her. His expression altered, but he did not ask whether the threat had been real. Teresa has rooms prepared for you at Foxhaven, he said. You'd be under her protection. No one could question the propriety. The offer carried no demand, yet Penelope felt the temptation of it. Foxhaven meant distance from gossip, servants who would not report to Deborah, and a name powerful enough to keep Malcolm's threats from reaching the door. It also meant asking working women to risk their wages while she disappeared behind ducal walls. Thank you, she said. I won't go. Charles did not argue. Where will you stay, Mrs. Bessett has rooms attached to her workrooms. In Spitalfields. Yes. Lady Teresa studied her face, then nodded. Charles asked, Where do you want me? The question struck more deeply than an offer of rescue. He did not ask what he could decide for her. He asked where she wished to place him. Follow the money, Penelope said. Your presence will make workers measure every word. Let Mrs. Bessett and me speak with them. Lady Teresa can continue approaching owners. You and Mr. Wren must examine the Pomeroy papers, the dividend records, and every authority attached to the investment. And publicly, say nothing in my defense unless I ask. A faint tension entered his jaw, but he listened. No payments to witnesses, she continued. No ducal request disguised as an invitation. No private removal of any paper that reaches House Pomeroy. Agreed. If the records harm Eastborough, Mr. Wren must keep them. Agreed. Penelope looked toward the front steps. I've hired a carriage. Mine would be safer. Yours would look like a declaration. Charles accepted that too. May I have a footman place your trunk inside? Yes, it was the only assistance she took. He did not offer his arm when she descended. He waited beneath the portico until Penelope turned back. She gave him a small nod. Only then did he bow. The hired carriage carried her east through streets that narrowed and darkened with smoke. By the time she reached Mrs. Bessett's building, the polish of Mayfair had given way to carts, hanging cloth, cramped shop fronts, and women carrying bundles against their hips. Mrs. Bessett received her without pity and showed her 2 clean rooms above the work floor. "The door locks," she said. "The rent is what I charge anyone else." Penelope paid the first week from her own purse. Before she had removed her bonnet, the first worker arrived. Mrs. Bessett remained present. The young woman described headaches by midday and sickness before evening. Penelope wrote no name until permission was given. The second worker spoke of burning in her throat and weakness in her fingers after folding green petals. The third had found powder inside her cuffs and had been told by a supervisor that complaint would cost her every respectable order in London. Their accounts matched the pattern already recorded. None knew Clarissa. None had attended the assembly. None had anything to gain by defending Penelope. Near dusk, 2 messages reached the workroom. The first came from a supplier warning that Malcolm had promised to blacklist any finisher who spoke against Winstead Green. The second claimed Eastborough patronage would soon return once the Duke recovered his judgment. Penelope folded both notes. "He's trying to make silence look like prudence." A knock sounded below. Mr. Wren entered the sitting room carrying an unopened packet marked with the Pomeroy seal. Charles followed, but stopped at the threshold until Mrs. Bessett invited him in. He had obeyed the division Penelope set. Wren placed the packet on the table. "This came from the family trust records. His Grace directed that it remain sealed until opened before you." Penelope looked at Charles. "Do you know what it contains?" "Only that my trustees omitted it from the first summary." Wren examined the wax, recorded its condition, and broke the seal. The first page was a voting certificate. He read the figures once, then again. "Your Grace," he said, "the trust didn't merely supply capital." Charles stood very still. Wren laid the paper flat between them. "House Pomeroy holds 24 voting shares in Lord Winstead's venture." On the 3 July, the voting certificate lay open on Mrs. Bessett's table, and for the first time Charles saw the exact measure of the authority he had failed to use. 24 shares did not make House Pomeroy the sole owner of Malcolm Loxwood's venture, but they carried enough votes to challenge appointments, demand accounts, and object to changes in production. Penelope read the certificate twice before looking at him. "Did you authorize the purchase?" "I authorized the trustees to acquire an interest if they judged the venture sound," Charles said. "I didn't know they had taken this many voting shares. But the authority began with your signature." "Yes." He did not turn toward Mr. Wren or ask the solicitor to soften the answer. Mrs. Bessett stood near the window, still enough to suggest distrust rather than calm. She had spent years watching gentlemen call themselves generous while reserving every useful power for their own comfort. Charles seemed to understand that she was waiting to see which sort of man he would prove to be. Lady Teresa arrived a few minutes later after completing a morning call on one of the women approached for a voluntary sample. Wren showed her the certificate and the accompanying trust summary. Her expression changed when she saw the number of shares. "Charles, if these papers become public, Eastborough may lose more than capital. Men who have opposed your factory reforms will say you profited from the very conditions you condemned. They'll call every future inquiry hypocrisy," Charles said, "and some of them will be right to ask whether my influence should survive this." Penelope watched him closely. "Did you know which pigment Malcolm ordered?" "No." "Did you know the ordinary stock differed from the presentation flowers?" "No." "Did you know women were becoming ill?" "No." She let the three answers remain between them. Do you believe not knowing removes your responsibility? Charles looked at the certificate again. No. Ignorance may describe what I intended. It doesn't erase what my money, warehouse, and name made possible. The reply did not absolve him, and he did not ask it to. Penelope drew the remaining papers from the opened packet. There were references to dividend distributions, voting notices, trustee minutes, and correspondence not included in the earlier summary. Then all of this must leave your control, she said. Lady Teresa's gaze moved to her brother, but Charles did not interrupt. Every share certificate, Penelope continued. Every letter, dividend account, trustee minute, warehouse report, and voting notice. Mr. Wren must hold them independently under written receipt. He must be free to name House Pomeroy in any public account if the documents require it. Agreed, Charles said. You must not review his final order of witnesses and papers beforehand. Agreed. You must not use the voting shares to protect Malcolm. I won't. Nor may you use them privately to force an outcome that makes Eastborough appear to have rescued everyone. A flicker of pain crossed his face, not because the condition was unfair, but because it named the temptation rank made possible. I agree to that as well. Wren closed the packet and considered the terms. I can prepare an instrument, placing the certificates and voting authority in my keeping until the inquiry and related claims are resolved. The trust clerk can be ordered to deliver the remaining records under seal. My authority to disclose them must be stated plainly. Charles looked at Penelope. If the truth stains my house, hiding it would make the stain chosen. Yes, then write it plainly. Wren moved to Mrs. Bessett's narrow desk. While he drafted, the workroom below continued with the steady clipping of scissors and the whisper of folded silk. No one there knew that a duke's financial power was being removed from his own hands above their heads. Penelope found the contrast almost unbearable. Those women had been told they possessed too little standing to be believed. Charles had possessed enough standing to prevent scrutiny and had not known he should use it. The instrument Wren prepared named the 24 shares, the voting certificates, the trust correspondence, the dividend records, and all related notices. It authorized disclosure wherever necessary to explain the commercial history. It denied House Pomeroy any right of prior review or withdrawal. Wren read every clause aloud. Do you accept the wording, Your Grace? I do. Charles took the pen. His hand remained steady as he signed Charles Eastborough beneath the date. He added a short direction requiring the Pomeroy trust clerk to deliver the remaining records to Wren's chambers at Lincoln's Inn, without first sending copies to Eastborough House. Wren signed below him, sanded the ink, folded the instrument, and pressed his seal into dark wax. Only when the wax had cooled did the tension leave Charles's fingers. A small tremor passed through his hand after the choice had become impossible to recall. Penelope saw it. Charles began to withdraw his hand from the desk, perhaps to conceal what the others had noticed. She placed her gloved hand over his. He went still. This was not the accidental brush of the waltz or the practical steadiness of the warehouse platform. No uneven plank required her touch. No crowd pushed them together. Penelope chose it because the cost before him was real, and because he had accepted that cost without asking her to comfort or praise him. Charles did not close his fingers over hers. He waited. Penelope turned her palm beneath his and threaded their fingers together. His breath changed. Then his hand closed gently around hers. I'm not absolving you, she said. I know, and I won't let affection become proof that your choices were right, nor should you. But what you've done here matters. Charles held her gaze. It matters, even if you never think well of me again. Wren lifted the sealed instrument and certificates into his case. Mrs. Bessett looked at Charles for a long moment, then gave one small nod. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition that he had surrendered something powerful men usually protected. They left Spitalfields near 5 o'clock. Lady Teresa rode opposite them in the Eastborough carriage, because propriety required it, and because Penelope had no wish to turn private trust into public scandal. Penelope sat beside Charles, beneath the fold of her skirt. Their hands remained joined. When the carriage entered the broader western streets, Charles loosened his fingers enough to let her withdraw without awkwardness. She did not. Lady Teresa looked out the window with deliberate courtesy. The following morning, Wren arrived at Eastborough House, with the first dividend extracts delivered under seal by the trust clerk. He opened them before Penelope, Charles, and Teresa. The figures changed sharply in February. Production costs fell when the ordinary pigment orders began. Dividend payments rose in the same quarter and continued rising each month afterward. Wren placed a warehouse delivery record beside the accounts. Near the first shipment of the cheaper pigment stood 2 initials written in black ink. M.L. Wren did not call the initials proof that Malcolm knew of the illnesses. They proved choice, timing, and profit. Knowledge of the human cost would require the workers' records. Penelope followed the date to Malcolm's earlier complaint that the safer color had reduced the promised return. 3 days later, the cheaper order had doubled. Charles read the entry without moving. Profit had not merely followed the dangerous production. Someone had chosen the danger because profit would follow. The only question left was how much Malcolm had known about the women who paid the difference. The first entry Mrs. Vale read aloud was not the worst in the sick pay book. That made it more difficult to dismiss. E.H., absent Tuesday afternoon, returned Wednesday. Ill again Friday after green finishing. Her finger moved to the next line. Same initials, same complaint, following week. The small brown volume lay open on Mrs. Bessett's cutting table on the morning of the 8th July. Its cracked cover had been rubbed smooth by years of handling. Mrs. Vale, the forewoman, kept one hand beside it until Mr. Wren finished describing the binding, the numbered pages, and the absence of any visible removal. Only after he gave her a written receipt did she surrender it into his keeping. Charles stood opposite Penelope, with Lady Teresa near the window. The evidence case containing rosettes A and B, rosette F, and Penelope's sealed scissors remained locked at Lincoln's Inn. No physical specimen had been brought to the workroom. Wren placed the sick pay book beside the warehouse records already transferred to him. The dates aligned with brutal simplicity. Before February, absences were irregular. After Malcolm's first order for the cheaper ordinary pigment, headaches and nausea began to cluster around green production. When women spent several days on white or blue stock, complaints eased. When the green bundles returned, so did the illness. Mrs. Vale turned another page. This girl lost feeling in 2 fingers for half a day. This one complained that her throat burned whenever she swallowed. This one was sent home after being sick beneath the table. Charles read the initials without speaking. Penelope watched the restraint in his face. He did not ask whether the notes proved too much. He did not look for an entry that might make House Pomeroy less responsible. Wren drew forward a warehouse complaint written in Malcolm's hand. The safer presentation color it said had reduced profit beneath the return promised to investors. 3 days later, the ordinary pigment order doubled. He knew the safe color cost more, Penelope said. He knew enough to preserve it for presentation pieces. Mrs. Bessett added, and he knew women were complaining. I sent word through his clerk in March. Wren looked up. Can you prove delivery? The boy who carried it remembers. I also entered the fee in my daybook. Then we'll take both statements separately. A messenger arrived before noon with a note from Mr. Cole. Malcolm had appeared at the warehouse with 2 hired carts and demanded the remaining ordinary crates. Cole had refused to release anything without the written inventory, and witness Charles had required. Malcolm had threatened dismissal, but the lease did not give him authority to dismiss Eastborough's manager. The stock remained in place. Charles folded the note. He's trying to remove what can still be compared. Because the records now show why the change happened, Penelope said. What they don't yet show is what Clarissa asked me to do. Lady Teresa glanced toward the clock. Her note requested 2 o'clock. Clarissa received them in a small upstairs sitting room at Loxwood House, with the curtains drawn against the afternoon glare. She wore a loose white wrapper without jewelry. The absence of green made her look younger, but not restored. Her face remained pale. One hand trembled when she lifted a cup, and she set it down before the saucer could rattle. A maid sat beside the door. Lady Teresa took the chair nearest the window. Wren kept his notebook closed upon his knee until Clarissa gave permission. Penelope sat opposite her cousin. Mamma says I'm too weak to understand what happened, Clarissa began. Malcolm says I remember only fragments. What do you remember? Penelope asked. Clarissa looked at the floor. I remember not being able to draw breath. I remember seeing you. I remember saying, take it away. The words entered the room quietly, yet they completed what Deborah had cut in half. Wren asked, may I record that, Lady Clarissa? Yes. He opened his notebook. Clarissa continued with visible effort. The headaches began weeks before the assembly. Then I felt sick after fittings. My throat burned when the flowers were pinned near my face. Twice my hands shook so badly my maid fastened my gloves. Who knew? Penelope asked. Mamma. She called it season fatigue. Clarissa swallowed. Malcolm saw me nearly faint after luncheon. He said everyone was tired and the venture couldn't survive another delay. Lady Teresa's expression hardened. Did either of them tell you the ordinary stock differed from the presentation flowers? No. Did they suggest you stop wearing green? Penelope asked. Clarissa gave a small laugh with no amusement in it. Mamma said the assembly was our last chance. Creditors were restless. Malcolm needed orders. She thought if the evening succeeded, people would remember me, and someone important might still wish to marry into the family. Shame rose into her face. I believed her. I wanted to believe every headache was vanity or weakness because the other answer would mean. The girls in the workrooms were suffering for the same reason. Penelope did not move to comfort her. Clarissa needed truth more than ease. Why are you speaking now? Because when I couldn't breathe, you came toward me. Clarissa lifted her eyes. Everyone else looked at the gown. The sentence struck Penelope with more force than apology. Clarissa pressed her fingertips together. I mocked your plain dress because I thought you were trying to make me look foolish. I repeated Mamma's words because I was afraid your courage made my obedience visible. Will you say all of this publicly? Penelope asked. Clarissa's breath shortened. If I do, my season is over. Yes, Mamma may never forgive me. She may not. Malcolm will say I'm confused. He will. Clarissa closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, fear remained, but decision had settled beneath it. Then I'll speak where he can't finish my sentences for me. Wren recorded her statement. Clarissa corrected the date of one fitting and added that Deborah had ordered the heaviest rosette cluster despite knowing the symptoms. She signed slowly. Penelope rose. You said you were sorry, Clarissa whispered. I haven't yet. Clarissa flinched. Penelope's voice remained gentle. Help identify every worker and every woman who bought the ordinary stock. Help correct the accusation you allowed to stand. Then your apology will have somewhere to go. Clarissa nodded. Outside the sitting room, Charles waited in an open antechamber. He had not entered the private interview. When Lady Teresa and Wren went ahead to speak with the physician, Penelope remained near the doorway. She'll testify, she said, and she confirms Malcolm knew she was ill? Charles asked. He knew enough to dismiss it. Deborah knew more and demanded display anyway. Charles looked toward the closed sitting room door. My money gave him reach. His choice remains his, Penelope said. Your responsibility is what you do after knowing. I'm ashamed it took your courage to make me look. Shame without action asks, the harmed to comfort the guilty. Then I won't ask that of you. Penelope stepped closer. You haven't. She lifted one hand and touched his cheek. Charles became still beneath her palm. He did not turn the gesture into permission for more. You surrendered the papers, she said. You protected the warehouse. You let Clarissa speak without buying her answer. His eyes held hers. May I hold you? Penelope answered by stepping into his arms. Charles gathered her carefully, and she placed both hands against his back, holding him in return. The embrace contained no absolution. It held only the relief of two people who had chosen truth and found each other still standing inside it. When they parted, Lady Teresa returned with Wren and a folded note. 3 owners have agreed to surrender samples, Wren said. Each will detach and seal her own ornament. One came from the same assembly consignment as Lady Clarissa's flowers. Penelope looked at Charles. The incomplete sentence had been restored. Now, the evidence from Clarissa's own gown could be made to speak as well. The dust on Penelope's scissors told the truth before Malcolm could purchase another version of it. On the morning of the 12th July, Mr. Wren placed his locked evidence case upon the central table in Mr. Harland's rooms and asked every witness to examine the seals before anything was opened. Lady Teresa stood beside Penelope. Charles remained at the far end of the table, close enough to hear but not positioned as master of the inquiry. 3 titled women had come with companions to confirm the voluntary surrender of their ornaments. Lady Martindale was among them, her expression stripped of the confidence she had worn at the opera. I removed the flower myself, she said. My sister watched me place it in unused paper. No servant from Eastborough or Loxwood touched it. Wren checked her signed receipt and identified the parcel as Rosette C. Rosette D had been detached from a spray worn at a garden breakfast. Rosette E came from an ornament, purchased for a daughter's presentation gown, and had been traced to the same assembly consignment as Clarissa's flowers. Wren then named the objects already in his keeping. Rosette A had fallen from Clarissa's train at Eastborough House and tested positive. Rosette B had been supplied by Malcolm as untouched Winstead stock and tested negative. Rosette F was the dense cluster. Penelope had cut from Clarissa's bodice, after the whispered request to remove it. The final packet contained Penelope's silver embroidery, scissors, still bearing green dust and fibers upon the blades. Each seal remained unbroken. Each object had travelled from Wren's chambers at Lincoln's Inn under his direct supervision. Mr. Harland began with rosette C, D, and E. He clipped only a small fragment from each artificial flower, then returned the remainder to its paper before Wren resealed it. All 3 specimens used twisted cream thread beneath the petals. All 3 produced the same dark deposit that had appeared when rosette A was examined. Lady Martindale sat down slowly. My maid complained that her hands burned after she packed the spray. Penelope looked at her. What did you tell her? Shame entered the woman's face, that she should use better soap. No one comforted her with denial. Mrs. Bessett said only, "You can still tell the truth now." Wren placed rosette F upon the clean cloth. The separate seal, impressed at Loxwood House, remained intact. He read the description made that night, including the green residue, twisted cream-securing thread, and the white shawl used beneath the cluster. Mr. Harland opened the packet and removed one small portion from an outer petal. The cream core was visible where Penelope's scissors had cut the securing thread. It matches the ordinary construction, Mrs. Bessett said. The chemical test darkened the copper. A second examination confirmed the same result found in rosettes A, C, D, and E. Rosette F had not been transformed into a dangerous object by Penelope's touch. It had already belonged to the same ordinary Winstead production that had sickened workers and left Clarissa struggling to breathe. Wren resealed the remainder. Then he opened the scissors packet. Penelope watched the blades emerge from the cloth exactly as she had surrendered them. Green particles remained near the hinge and along one cutting edge. Mr. Harland collected only the loose residue, using no substance from rosette F or any other flower. He examined the fibers beneath his lens, compared them with a retained clipping from Clarissa's cluster, and performed a limited test on the powder. The fibers are consistent with the twisted cream thread and dyed petal material from rosette F, he said. The chemical result is also consistent with the residue shed by that cluster. Malcolm's accusation returned to Penelope with perfect clarity. Prepared scissors. Poison carried in a reticule. A jealous woman applying danger at the moment of rescue. Is there evidence that a separate preparation was placed upon the blades? Wren asked. I find none, Mr. Harland replied. The condition supports their having cut the affected ornament. I can't speak to every moment before they were sealed, but I see no different deposited substance and no material inconsistent with Rosette F. Charles's hand closed once against the back of his chair. It was the only outward sign of what the finding cost him to hear. Penelope did not look away from the scissors. They had belonged to her mother's sewing case before society called a weapon. Now the same dust used to accuse her had become evidence of the act Clarissa had requested. Wren resealed the scissors and returned them to the separate compartment of his case. They remain in my keeping until the public examination, and any related claims no longer require the originals. As they should, Penelope said. The evidence order for Exeter Hall was prepared that afternoon at Eastborough House. Wren laid out the sequence in the morning room. The gathering would take place on the 14th of July, before invited merchants, patrons, physicians, affected workers, creditors, and selected members of the press. It would be a public examination of manufacture and accounts, not a criminal trial. Penelope reviewed the witness list. Mrs. Vale and the workers speak first. Wren made the adjustment. Before the chemist? Yes. The illness began before anyone had a test result. Their bodies are not supporting detail. He nodded. Then Mrs. Bessett on the thread distinction, the owners of C, D, and E, Mr. Harland on the findings, Rosette F and the scissors before the warehouse and financial records. Why before the accounts? Charles asked. Because Malcolm accused me of placing poison on Clarissa, Penelope said. That accusation must be answered before the room begins discussing profit. Otherwise, he'll claim money distracted everyone from the act itself. Charles accepted the reasoning. Wren continued. After the physical exhibits, Mr. Cole identifies the 2 production lines and the removed crates. Then the pigment invoices, warehouse orders, and dividend records. Charles looked at the papers bearing House Pomeroy's name. Could my investment be introduced after Malcolm's order is established? The room grew quiet. He did not disguise the request. If Eastborough appears first, some may decide the entire examination is a performance arranged by a duke to cleanse his own reputation. And if it appears later, Penelope said, others may believe you disclosed it only after Malcolm was already defeated. The workers should not lose their hearing because society prefers a scandal about my house. They won't. You should name the investment before any defense is made, then step aside. The women speak next. Your responsibility becomes part of the frame, not the subject of every witness. Charles looked at her for a long moment. You're right. He turned to Wren. Place House Pomeroy's financial connection immediately after your opening statement. No language of ignorance may be used to soften it. I'll record that instruction, Wren said. When the meeting ended, Wren departed for Lincoln's Inn with every specimen still locked in his case. Lady Teresa carried the revised witness list into the adjoining room. Penelope walked into the conservatory, needing air that did not smell of wax, paper, and chemical residue. The doors to Teresa's room remained open. Charles followed only after Penelope glanced back and gave a small nod. Evening light lay across the tiled floor and broad palm leaves. Tomorrow may cost you your influence, she said. It may. Your trustees could resign. Some probably will. Men who dislike reform will call you a hypocrite. They won't be entirely wrong. Penelope turned toward him. You didn't know the pigment? No. But I enjoyed the reports, the praise, and the dividends without learning who handled the color. Ignorance was comfortable enough that I failed to question it. He stopped a several feet from her. I'm afraid of tomorrow, Penelope, but not only tomorrow. She waited. Charles's composure held, though his voice lowered. I'm afraid you may respect what I've done and still not want me when this is finished. The truth of it entered the quiet space between them without rank or defense. Penelope drew one breath. Respect isn't love. No, but without respect, love wouldn't be safe. His eyes remained on hers. May I kiss you? No danger required gratitude. No accusation demanded comfort. Penelope was free to refuse. Yes, she stepped forward, placed one hand against his lapel, and closed the final distance herself. Charles kissed her with a restraint that did not weaken the feeling beneath it. He waited even within the kiss, answering only what she gave. Penelope lifted her face and held him nearer. When she drew back, she rested her forehead against his. His hands remained light at her waist. The truth comes first, she whispered. Always. Afterward, we speak of us. I'll wait. Lady Teresa's footsteps sounded in the adjoining room. She appeared with a folded message delivered under the Loxwood seal. Malcolm offered to destroy all ordinary stock before dawn, pay Penelope privately, settle the workers' complaints without public names, and cancel Exeter Hall. Charles read the offer once, then he folded it without signing. Send it back, he said, unanswered. By noon, On the 14th July, Exeter Hall held more truth than fashionable London had intended to hear. Workers from Spitalfields sat beside dressmakers, physicians, merchants, creditors, titled patrons, and selected members of the press. The high room carried every whisper, yet when Mr. Tobias Wren stepped before the long, white-covered table, silence reached the gallery. His locked evidence case rested at one end. Mrs. Vale's brown sick-pay book lay beside it under the receipt that had transferred it into his keeping. Penelope entered in a second gown of simple ivory silk, her mother-of-pearl clasp fixed at her left shoulder, heads turned as they had at Eastborough House. This time, their attention possessed no power to define her. Wren waited until she stood beside Mrs. Bessett and the workshop women. "This gathering is a public examination of manufacture and accounts," he said. "It isn't a criminal trial. We're here to establish what was made, what was known, how money moved, and who carried the cost." He turned toward Charles. The Duke stood without notes. "House Pomeroy supplied capital to Lord Winstead's venture," he said. "My trust held 24 voting shares. My warehouse sheltered the stock. My accounts received dividends when the cost of production fell. I didn't know which pigment had been selected, and I didn't inspect the rooms where women handled it. That ignorance was comfortable, profitable, and mine. I won't ask this hall to separate Lord Winstead's decisions from the benefit my house accepted." A murmur moved through the audience. Charles did not remain at the centre. He stepped aside before the first worker spoke. Mrs. Vale opened the sick-pay book. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. E.H., absent Tuesday afternoon, returned Wednesday. Ill again Friday after green finishing. She read 2 more entries: headache, sickness, burning throat, weakness in the fingers. The dates gathered after the ordinary pigment order began in February. When the women worked white or blue stock, the complaints eased, she said. When the green bundles returned, so did the illness. Wren called one of the affected finishers. She was a narrow-shouldered woman with green stains still lodged beneath one cuff. "Why did you continue the work?" he asked. "Because missing a day meant missing bread," she said, "and because we were told ladies wore the flowers without harm, so the fault must be ours." Lady Martindale lowered her eyes. When Wren asked whether she had dismissed her maid's complaint of burning hands, she answered, "I did. I told her to use better soap." Mrs. Bessett did not soften the admission. "You can tell the truth now." Malcolm rose before the room had fully absorbed it. Workroom illness proves nothing about one product. Women labor in heat, poor air, and long hours. No one denies hardship, but hardship is not poison. Wren inclined his head. Then we proceed to the material exhibits. He opened the evidence case only after the seals had been shown to the witnesses named in his records. Mrs. Bessett explained the construction in plain language. Rosettes A, C, D, E, and F all used twisted cream thread beneath their petals. Rosette B alone used straight green thread from the safer presentation line. Mr. Harland stated his findings without flourish. The 5 ordinary line specimens had produced matching results consistent with arsenical green pigment. Rosette B had not. Wren identified Rosette F as the cluster Penelope had cut from Clarissa's bodice. He then displayed the sealed packet containing Penelope's silver embroidery scissors. The residue on these blades matched the fibers and powder from Rosette F. Mr. Harland said, "I found no different deposited preparation. Their condition supports cutting the affected cluster, not applying a separate substance." The statement struck the hall with greater force than any defense Charles could have made. Penelope looked toward the people who had accepted Deborah's jealousy story because it demanded so little courage. One gentleman who had stepped away from her at the assembly now stared at the floor. Wren asked Mr. Cole to identify the warehouse records. Cole described the separate presentation room, the 12 ordinary crates sent to Loxwood House, and Malcolm's instruction that no inspection delay them. Then he repeated the words heard by the warehouse boy. The clerk said, "The safe ones are for investors, the others are for the ladies." Wren laid Malcolm's written complaint beside the pigment invoices. The safer color had reduced the return promised to investors. 3 days later, Malcolm doubled the order for the cheaper ordinary pigment. The dividend record showed that House Pomeroy's returns rose in the same quarter. Malcolm stood again, his face stripped of charm. No death has been proved. The venture employed hundreds. Winstead credit was failing. If I had closed production at every complaint, the workers you now parade before society would have lost every wage. Temporary illness was preferable to total collapse. Penelope moved to the center of the table. She touched no exhibit. Necessity doesn't become morality because powerful men send the cost downward, she said, and suffering doesn't need to become a funeral before it deserves belief. This time, the silence did not belong to doubt. It belonged to recognition. The side doors opened. Clarissa entered on Lady Teresa's arm, plainly dressed and pale enough that no one could mistake her recovery for completeness. A chair had been placed for her. She sat before speaking. "Penelope didn't poison me." Deborah rose halfway from her seat. "Clarissa, you're still unwell." Clarissa looked at her mother. "I'm well enough to finish the sentence you used against her." Her voice shook, but it carried. "I had headaches, nausea, throat pain, and trembling hands for weeks." Mama knew. Malcolm saw me nearly faint and said the venture couldn't survive another delay. At the assembly, I told Penelope, "Take it away." She cut the flowers from my gown because I asked her to. Deborah's face lost color. "After everything this family sacrificed for your season, you would shame us publicly. Gratitude can't require a daughter to keep wearing what makes her ill." The words severed the last thread of Deborah's control. Wren produced the instrument by which Charles had transferred the voting shares and authority into independent keeping. Charles confirmed it. House Pomeroy cannot use those votes to bury this examination or arrange a private rescue. The chairman of the textile subscription rose from the front row. Lord Winstead is suspended from every office connected with the subscription until the claims are assessed. 2 merchants announced the withdrawal of pending orders. A creditor stated that no further credit would be extended against Winstead Green. Wren did not pretend the consequences were complete. Civil claims will now be prepared for unpaid sick wages, medical costs, and commercial loss. The venture's assets and Lord Winstead's interest will be examined in the proper course. Eastborough dividends already transferred into my keeping will remain there for restitution after Lord Winstead's assets are applied. Malcolm remained Earl of Winstead. No hall could strip him of that title. Yet the machinery that had allowed his rank to command silence was failing in public. Deborah left before the proceedings ended, her retreat toward the Dower House already decided. Clarissa formally retracted the accusation against Penelope and agreed to help identify every worker and purchaser affected by the ordinary stock. Charles added, "Every dividend House Pomeroy received from this venture will be used as Mr. Wren has stated." Penelope turned toward him. "Call it what it is." Charles understood. Wages owed, medical costs and restitution. not charity. The workshop women did not approach Penelope as a lady rescued by a duke. Mrs. Vale called her Miss Loxwood. The finisher with the stained cuff took her hand and said, "You listened before anyone believed it was respectable to listen." Only after the hall had emptied and Wren had returned every sealed exhibit to his locked case did Charles come to Penelope beneath the high windows. "I loved you first, because you entered a room that demanded ornament and refused its approval," he said. "Then I loved you because you refused to excuse me when excuse would have been easier for both of us. I love you, Penelope." She stepped closer. "I love you too, Charles, not because you stood above the truth, but because you allowed it to stand above you." His restraint broke into a smile that held relief, wonder, and something almost boyish. "May I court you openly?" "Yes." Penelope placed both hands against his chest, rose toward him, and initiated the kiss. It was tender, certain, and freely chosen. Behind them, the evidence table stood empty. Nothing essential had been hidden, and nothing between them needed to be. The weeks after Exeter Hall tested whether public courage could survive private inconvenience. Charles courted Penelope openly from the middle of July, with Lady Teresa present on drives, morning calls, and visits to Spitalfields. But he never used the courtship to hurry her trust. Penelope watched most closely when they disagreed. In August, Charles proposed closing an entire supplier whose proprietor had concealed unsafe handling practices. "It's the cleanest course," he said, over a table covered with reports at Eastborough House. "No more orders, no further risk." Penelope read the list of women employed there. Clean for whom? Charles's expression tightened. "The proprietor can't be trusted. Then remove his control. If you close the rooms tomorrow, 40 women lose wages for a choice they didn't make. Keeping the place open may expose them again. Not if inspection begins before production resumes. The dangerous stock is destroyed under witness, and wages continue during the change." Charles was silent long enough for Penelope to know he was not agreeing merely to please her. At last, he drew the report back. "You're right. I was trying to make the problem disappear quickly enough to feel decisive. Decisiveness is useful when it doesn't transfer the punishment downward. Then we'll supervise the transition." He did exactly that. The women kept their positions. The proprietor lost control of the contract. Independent inspection began before new material entered the building. Charles did not later describe the decision as his reform. He told the trustees that Miss Loxwood had prevented House Pomeroy from correcting one injustice by creating another. Meanwhile, Mr. Wren's civil claims advanced at the slower pace reality required. Malcolm's offices remained suspended. Merchants withdrew orders. Creditors refused new advances. By early September, he had sold his remaining interest in the venture and agreed to part with a London property to meet medical costs, unpaid sick wages, and commercial claims. The first payments reached Mrs. Vale's workers before the month ended. They came through Wren's account under each woman's own name. No envelope called the money charity. Malcolm remained Earl of Winstead, but title could not restore the machinery of influence he had lost. Invitations ceased. Committees found reasons not to include him. Men who once praised his enterprise now spoke of insufficient caution, as though they had not applauded every emerald display. Deborah withdrew to the Winstead Dower House. She sent Penelope no apology, and wrote to Clarissa only once, saying obedience had been mistaken for cruelty by people who did not understand family duty. Clarissa kept the letter, but did not answer it. Her recovery continued through the summer. She wrote separately to Mrs. Bessett, Mrs. Vale, and the women whose names appeared in the sick pay records. Some accepted her apology. Some returned the letters unopened. Penelope did not ask anyone to forgive. Clarissa began assisting Wren's clerk with claimant lists, correcting addresses, identifying purchasers, and admitting which ornaments had come from the ordinary stock. She worked without public credit. That, more than tears, convinced Penelope that remorse might become useful. Charles also rewrote the investment rules of House Pomeroy. No manufacturing venture would receive capital without independent inspection of the actual workrooms, direct wage records, and reports signed by workers chosen by their fellows, rather than by the proprietor. When a trustee complained that such reports invited embarrassment, Charles replied, "Embarrassment costs less than concealed harm." Penelope heard the remark from Teresa, not from Charles. His refusal to advertise his own improvement pleased her more than the rule itself. On the morning of the 16th September, Lady Teresa invited Penelope to Eastborough House for what appeared to be an ordinary call. The doors of Teresa's morning room stood open, and Teresa remained in the adjoining boudoir. Charles waited beside the window. On the table lay a set of proposed marriage articles, already reviewed by Penelope's own solicitor. They protected her existing funds, income earned in her own name, fees from textile safety consultation, and any property settled upon or gifted to her. They also preserved her right to employ a secretary and seek independent legal advice after marriage. Penelope looked from the papers to Charles. "You arranged these before asking me." "I arranged protections before asking you," he said. "I didn't arrange your answer. And if my answer is no, the articles remain proof that fairness shouldn't depend upon whether you marry me." He came closer, but stopped beyond reach. Rank had once taught him that certainty reassured people. Love had taught him that waiting could be the greater form of courage. "Penelope, I love your courage, but I don't love only the parts of you that are easy to admire. I love your refusal, your anger, your patience with facts, and the way you make kindness answerable to truth. I don't ask you to disappear into Eastborough. I ask whether you'll let me build a life beside you, in which neither of us must become smaller for the other." Penelope crossed the space between them. "I love you too, Charles, and yes, I'll marry you." Relief moved through his face before he mastered it. "May I kiss you?" "You may." She took his face between her hands and kissed him first. He held her with the same restraint that had once kept him from touching her clasp, though joy made the restraint warmer now. They married at St. George's, Hanover Square, on the 30th October 1862. Mrs. Bessett and Mrs. Vale sat where every titled guest could see them. Lady Teresa stood nearest Penelope. Clarissa attended in dove-grey silk without green ornament, and made no attempt to claim forgiveness through presence alone. Malcolm did not attend. Deborah remained at the dower house. Penelope's mother-of-pearl clasp fastened her veil. When she left the church as Duchess of Eastborough, Charles still spoke her name, as though marriage had added to her life rather than absorbed it. 3 weeks later, on the 21st November, Mrs. Bessett's Spitalfields workrooms reopened. New ventilation shafts drew the heavy air upward. Safe stock stood in clearly marked cupboards. Wage books carried each woman's full name, agreed rate, hours, and payment, with duplicate entries available to the workers themselves. Before the luncheon began, Mr. Wren arrived with a small sealed parcel. "The certified findings are complete, and the remaining claims no longer require the original tool," he said. Penelope broke the seal. Her silver embroidery scissors lay inside, intact, their blades cleaned only after the recorded examination. She placed them in the sewing case that had belonged to her mother, then set the case upon her own work table. The object society had called a weapon had returned as what it had always been, a tool in her own hand. The luncheon table stretched beneath the broad skylight. Workers, merchants, physicians, and selected patrons sat without precedence. There was no raised place for aristocrats and no ceremonial chair at the head. Before joining them, Penelope stood in the private fitting room wearing uncolored cream silk. Charles waited by the door while she fastened the mother-of-pearl clasp herself. He watched, but did not reach for it. When the clasp was secure, she met his reflection. At the first ball, he said, everyone looked at you because you seemed untouched by the room's hunger to display you. And you? I looked because you were willing to disappoint it. Penelope turned and placed both hands against his chest. Today, I don't care who is looking. She kissed him before he could answer. Charles held her gently, not as protection from danger, but as recognition of joy freely chosen. I love you, he said when they parted. I know, she replied, smiling, and I love you. They entered the workroom together. Charles left the head chair empty and sat beside her halfway down the table. Conversation rose around them. Mrs. Vale corrected a merchant who misread a worker's name, and he apologized. Clarissa carried a tray to women who had once assembled ornaments for her gowns. Beneath the table, Charles opened his hand. He did not take Penelope's. She looked at his waiting palm, then threaded her fingers through his. Winter light fell through the skylight and caught the mother-of-pearl clasp above the uncolored silk. It shone beside the returned scissors on Penelope's work table, and the wage books where every woman's name stood beside her labor, while the man Penelope had chosen sat not above her, but at her side.